In the latter part of the 19th century, when the Methodist Church was holding its conference, one leader stood up and shared his vision both for the church and society at large. He told the ministers and evangelists how he believed someday men would fly from place to place instead of merely travelling on horseback. But it was a concept too outlandish for many members to handle. One minister, Bishop Wright, stood up and angrily protested. "Heresy," he shouted. "Flight is reserved for the angels." He went on to elaborate that if God had intended man to fly, he would have given him wings. Clearly, the bishop was unable to envision what the speaker was predicting. When Bishop Wright finished his brief protest, he gathered up his two sons, Orville and Wilbur, and left the auditorium. That's right, his sons were Orville and Wilbur Wright. Several years later, on December the 17th, 1903, those two sons did what their father called impossible. They made 4 flights that day. The first lasted only 12 seconds, but the fourth lasted 59 seconds and took them 852 feet. The two brothers partnered together to accomplish the impossible, and in the process, they changed the world. They discovered that power of partnership. What Bishop Wright declared as being against the will of God became the very calling for which his sons lived. Orville Wright said this: "I got more thrill out of flying before I had ever been in the air at all, while lying in bed thinking about how exciting it would be to fly." The Wright brothers dreamt of the way the world could be. This dream inspired, motivated, and propelled them into action. What dream inspires, motivates, and propels you into action? Have you ever thought that your dream, your hope, and your passion may have been given to you by God? I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the colour of their skin, but by the content of their character. Martin Luther King Jr. If to be feelingly alive to the sufferings of my fellow creatures is to be a fanatic, I am one of the most incurable fanatics ever permitted to be at large. William Wilberforce. Some men's ambition is art. Some men's ambition is fame. Some men's ambition is gold. My ambition is the souls of men. William Booth. A dream, a vision, a passion was stirred up within the hearts of these men. These dreams didn't end when they opened their eyes. These God-given passions inspired these men of God to earnestly work for a world where these dreams would be more fully realised. We won't all be the Kings, Wilberforces and Booths of our day when we recognise our dream and pursue it. But perhaps the pursuit of our dream is what we were created for. Frederick Buechner writes this: "The place God calls you to is the place where your deep gladness and the world's deep hunger meet." There is a myth that God's call is always to some place, some role, some situation that conflicts with who you are, where you've been, and what gifts you have. There is no denying that the call of God is costly, is uncomfortable, and is so tough at times. Jesus himself says, "If any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross daily, and follow me." But God has created you, led you, and transformed you up to this point to use you where he calls you to be. When God calls you, he doesn't want you to erase your personality, gifts and skills. He wants to refine them and use them to fulfill his mission through you. Following the call of God demands that we leave some things behind and let go of the things which hold us down. But it also invites us to take ourselves to the places and situations where God leads us to, building his kingdom through who we are. The story of the Wright brothers speaks of doing the impossible. Now, many of us are desperate to hop on a plane, to travel to sunnier climes, or to see loved ones. Until last year, we took such things for granted. It's only 120 years ago that the idea would have seemed ridiculous, impossible, and, as Bishop Wright says, reserved for the angels. But passion, dedication and dreaming saw Orville and Wilbur's vision become a reality. What God-given dreams have you written off as impossible? Or what God-given dreams have you let someone else write off as impossible? The Wright family story shows us how easy but dangerous it is for us to try to dictate what is and isn't the will of God. But it also teaches us about the joy of partnership in pursuit of dreams. The Wright brothers partnered together to enable us to fly like birds. The invitation to respond to God's call is the invitation to partner together with God to transform our world. God delights in you. He adores you and loves you, but he too has a purpose for you. He wants the whole world to know his love, his compassion and salvation, a more spectacular reality than even flying. And he calls you to be willing to partner with him. DL Moody said this: "If God is your partner, make your plans big." Absolutely. But when God calls us, he doesn't hand us a piece of paper with his instructions for our mission on and wait for us to come back when it's complete. He comes with us on his mission. God calls us to partner with him, but he too calls us to partner with one another. If we look around at the family of God, we see such a wealth of personalities, gifts and talents. Together we are called to build the kingdom of God on earth. As Mother Teresa says, "What I can do, you cannot. What you can do, I cannot. But together we can do something beautiful for God." I've spoken today on what it is to be called and on how we can do the impossible with God when we respond to him. But I've spoken little on discerning God's specific call in our lives. Over recent years, my perception of calling has developed and changed. But I've become aware that we can become so caught up in pursuing God's call that we forget to pursue God. Anne Voskamp says this: "We want clarity, and God gives a call. We want a roadmap, and God gives a relationship. We want answers, and God gives his hand." Now, you may be called to be a nurse, or a homemaker, or an engineer, or a Salvation Army officer. You may be called to volunteer in a particular role, or befriend a certain person, or support a specific cause. As you draw close to God, I pray that you will be surrounded by peace as you recognise and respond to that calling. But each and every one of us is called to follow Jesus. We can deny we are called to the remote tribes of the Amazon rainforest or the tough gangs of inner city London. We can deny we are called to a specific ministry or vocation. But we cannot deny that we are called to love God and to love others. And we too are called not simply to do, but also to be the person God created us to be. Pope Francis says this: "How wonderful it is to be surprised by God's call, to embrace his word and to walk in the footsteps of Jesus. Your life will become richer and more joyful each day." If today you hear God's voice calling you and leading you in a certain direction, may you have the courage and boldness to say, "Yes, I am willing." If today you hear God's voice calling you to reach out to a certain person or pursue an area of ministry, may you have the strength and motivation to say, "Yes, I am willing." And when today you hear God's voice calling you to love him and to love your neighbour, may you have the conviction of faith to say, "Yes, I am willing." God bless you.